Hey, this is Daniel, and welcome back to another video on the book of Revelation. We are in Revelation chapter 13, and this is our, 25th video of the series, I think. 12 plus 12 is 24, plus 1 is 25. Yeah, 25th video of the series. And we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through verse 10, at the sea beast. Everybody gets scared and nervous. We're in the scary sections now. Actually, there's not much to be worried about. There's not much to be worried about because the things that John is writing about were to happen soon, very quickly, at hand, near. They were about to take place. And so we might ask, what relevance does all this have to us? Let me tell you, it has a lot of relevance because from the very beginning of the church, we're talking even within the first century, but then on, of course, especially in the 4th century onwards, we have dealt with this situation, metaphorically speaking. And the warnings contained within the text of Revelation are very relevant today as we talk about the subject of the relationship between the church and the state. The idea of a theocracy and things like that, Christendom. And Revelation really challenges a lot of the prevalent ideas concerning the marriage of the church and the state. And we're actually going to see some of that here in chapter 13. Because what happens in chapter 13 is we have these two beasts, a sea beast and a land beast, and they are going to be in cahoots together to cause all kinds of problems. And we'll see what that looks like in a little bit. As we read through this text, let's keep in mind one of the passages that I mentioned in another video, John chapter 10, verse 10. The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but Jesus says, I've come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. And Revelation chapter 13, we need to keep that principle in mind, because as we're reading chapter 13, we might be deceived among the people, just as the people were, that this is talking about Jesus. Not that any Christian has ever given that interpretation, but watch what happens in the text. Verse 1, he says, And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. Now, already, I'll go ahead and point out that there's this huge correlation between Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, and Revelation chapter 17. The description of the beast in Revelation 17 bears a lot of resemblance to the description of the beast in Revelation chapter 13. And the commentators will be quick to point that out as well. But I want to point out that on his heads were blasphemous names. That is, this does not look like God at all, as we're going to see. On the saints, though, is not the mark of the beast, but is the name of God. And Revelation chapter 19, whenever the word of God appears riding on a white horse, on him is written his name, the word of God. But here's blasphemous names. So we have something of an anti-Christ. We have something of a false Christ or a pseudo-Christ as we read through this. More technical, the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians 2 conforms more strongly to the latter beast in this chapter in verses 11 through 18. But we'll talk about that as we go on. So the dragon is Satan. He is the great serpent of old, as we learned in chapter 12. And he is summoning this beast out of the sea. This is reminiscent, of course, of Daniel chapter 7, in which Daniel sees 4 beasts come up out of the sea, the last one being monstrous. And allegedly, this is the same beast that is seen in in Daniel chapter 7, at least timeline-wise. And the beast he sees, verse 4, is like a leopard, which again reminds you of Daniel 7, and like a bear, which again reminds you of Daniel 7, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. Okay, there's a little bit of a different image there. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. You might recall how the heads of the horses in Revelation chapter 9 and verse 17 had mouths of lions as well. And remember what happened there. Out of those mouths came fire and brimstone, not the sharp two-edged sword, word of God. And the dragon gave him his power and his stone and great authority. Now this is interesting. In Matthew chapter 4, the dragon, Satan, the deceiver, stands on a mountain, shows Jesus all the kings of the land, everything that his eye could see. And he says, if you bow down before me, all this becomes yours. Well, apparently this beast has bowed down before Satan, has taken the path of violence, has taken the path of a national or earthly kingdom, and the dragon gladly gives him his power and his throne and his great authority. I saw one of his heads, verse 3, as if it had been slain. Now, this is the second reference we have to what we might think is Jesus. In verse 2, he has the mouth of a lion. In verse 3, he is as if he had been slain. And so this reminds us once more of the imagery from Revelation chapter 5. The point is this is someone who says that he looks like Christ, but really his name is blasphemous, as you see back in verse 1. He says he's an agent of God. He says he's an agent of divine, but he's actually anti that. Okay, verse 3. And his fatal wound was healed. So he's resurrected, it looks like. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. There is a theory. Craig S. Keener, in his IVP Biblical Background Commentary on the New Testament, points out that there was a very prevalent rumor in the first century among Jews, Christians, and everybody else that though Nero had died, he would come back in some sort of way. And so, allegedly, people say this could be talking about him. Okay, so the whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. And verse 4, they worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? Well, the answer to that question, as we're going to see in chapter 19, ends up being the Lamb, the one who actually was slain and came back to life again, the one who rides on a white horse whose name is the Word of God, and who wars with the nations, not with a sword that comes out of a sheath, but with the word that comes out of his mouth, the gospel, the same thing that was discussed in Revelation chapter 11. Who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? This is very, very similar to what we see in the Christophanies and Theophanies in Revelation 4 and 5 and other texts as well, where they're asking, who is like the Lord? And there's no one greater than the Lord. And, who is worthy to open these books? Well, it's the Lamb. That's the answer. In verse 5, there was a mouth given to him to speak arrogant words and blasphemies and authority and act for 42 months. Okay, so he's going to be prevalent for 42 months of time, acting on behalf of the dragon. Now, keep in mind that when Jesus was taken to the high mountain in Matthew chapter 4, he was shown the kingdoms of the land. That is, he was shown the promised land. The kingdoms that he could physically see with his eyes before him on this high mountain was the promised land. And he's told that he could have those. That is, he could be a national political ruler over Jerusalem if he would just bow down. Well, this is what the beast has done. He's bowed down to Satan. And so these are the lands that he's going to be given, but he's only going to be given authority to act for 42 months. Now, if you remember from Revelation chapter 12, in verse 14, the 42 months is defined as a time's time is in half a time. In verse 12, that's called a short time. On up here in, let's see, there was one other place that was mentioned, I believe, in chapter 12. Yes, verse 6, 1,260 days. Again, that number is brought up. That number is correlated to 42 months in Revelation chapter 11, verse 2, as well as verse 3. And so you have this consistent imagery of 42 months, 1,260 days, times time and half a time, all talking about the same time period. Again, this is evidence that Revelation is recapitulatory. That is, it's repeating itself. It gives you the vision, then it gives you the vision again, then it gives you the vision again, then it gives you the vision again, just over and over and over. Very fun. Okay, verse 6. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Notice the explanation here that's given in verse 6 of what the tabernacle of God is. The tabernacle is those who dwell in heaven. Now, we might think about this as physically dwelling in heaven. If I say physically, hopefully you know what I mean. But we could also think of this as being the company of God, both on heaven and on earth, that is, in God's presence. We might recall how in Revelation chapter 11, the temple of God would be preserved. God would spread his tabernacle over them, as we saw in another text, Revelation chapter, 7, I believe? And so you kind of get this imagery a couple different places. So he's blaspheming against God. He's blaspheming against his name, against his tabernacle, that is, against the saints. And what is it that he's saying? He's saying that they don't have the right to rule and to reign only I do. And so, verse 7, it was also given to him to make war with the saints. It's reminiscent of Revelation 20, by the way, and to overcome them. That's kind of scary. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. Verse 7. Hey, there's our refrain again. We saw this in Revelation chapter 5. We saw this in Revelation chapter 7. And we saw this same idea in Revelation chapter 10. All those, people, tongue, nation, tribe, etc. All right. This part is interesting because he's given authority over these people. But then in chapter 14, I believe it is, or is it chapter 15? We'll have to look ahead and see. The eternal gospel is going to be given to these people as well. So it's a constant tug of war between the beast and the lamb. We'll see who's victorious at the end of the book of Revelation. Spoiler alert, it's Jesus. But as for now, here's the bad stuff. Verse 8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. Now there is a bit of a textual thing here in verse 8. I would really, 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 really want this to say the book of the life of the Lamb who was slain from the foundation of the world. However, it apparently is a toss-up with the evidence leaning towards this rendering, where that it is those who are written in the book of the life from the foundation of the world. And so when we get a passage like that, we just accept it as it is. We don't have to force it to fit into a paradigm. We just accept it as it is and move on. And if we one day become textual critic scholars, which I am not, and which 99.9% sure you are not either, then we can have an opinion about this. But since we're just plebeians, we will accept it as it is. Okay, so all who dwell on the earth will worship him except this few. Now, is this the 144,000? Possibly, because in the next chapter, whenever the Lamb is standing on Mount Zion, it's 144,000 who have the name of the Father written on their foreheads. That is not the names of blasphemy. So this is the 144,000 that have come out of the Great Tribulation of Revelation chapter 7. Now keep in mind, there's still a whole multitude of people that no man can number that are going to worship God as well. But as for now, we're fixated on the tribes of Israel, the 144,000. Okay, he says in verse 9, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. Now this is fascinating. As you probably well know. Let me circle the word lamb here in blue. You should know what that means at this point. I'm keeping up with the references to John a little more closely as I get into the second half of the book. He says, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. Boom, we're back in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. Of course, Jesus uses this refrain in a couple different places in the gospel accounts as well. It's usually used in reference to the parables or something like that, where Jesus gives an enigmatic saying. And so here he's saying, really pay attention to what's about to be said. Really pay attention to how these people whose names are written in the book of life are saved. What does he say in verse 10? If anyone, which we know it's by the blood of the Lamb, but let's just have fun. If anyone is destined for captivity, or if anyone leads into captivity, whatever you say, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with a sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Now this line, here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints, is going to be used again whenever we get to some of this imagery in Revelation chapters 15, 16, and 17. But again, that's for future Daniel to worry about. And I'll try to track down all these cross-references and remember them as we go. But here's the perseverance of the saints. If anyone is destined to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with a sword he must be killed. Now, this could mean two different things. When he says, if anyone is destined to captivity, to captivity he goes, it could be saying, just go, non-violently, allow them to capture you, and go on. You don't have to defend yourself. However, the alternate reading for this text says, if anyone leads into captivity he must go. That is, those who perpetuate systems of slavery or captivity or whatever are going to the same thing happening to them. So there's two readings there, and you could take it either way. And then he says, if anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. This, of course, is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 26, and it's something that we've already talked about in the course of this study on Revelation. But allow me to remind you. In Matthew 26, Jesus was being arrested, and Peter takes out his sword We know Peter from a parallel text, takes out a sword, attempts to kill one of the servants of the high priest. Now it's Peter, by the way, versus a cohort. This dude had guts. He's taken out a sword to fight off a whole Roman cohort. So like 500, 600, 700 people, plus the servants and soldiers of the temple. And boom, there he goes. And Jesus heals the man, and he tells Peter, put your sword back into its place, because if you pick up the sword, you'll perish with the sword. And then he looks at the crowds, and he looks at the crowds made up of a Roman cohort and the Jewish priests, servants, and soldiers and things like that, guard of the temple. He looks at me and he says, do you come to me with swords? In other words, you are about to bring upon yourself the very thing that you're trying to do to me. It's not going to be good. And we're going to see this play out in the rest of the book of Revelation. It's going to get pretty nasty until we get to Revelation 21 and 22, where the eternal gospel is proclaimed in all the earth, as John is told he's going to have to do again. Okay, deep breath. So the perseverance of the saints is following the Lamb who had been slain in verse 8. And this shows up as suffering as a Christian, not as an evildoer or as a thief or as a murderer or as a troublesome meddler. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 12 through verse 16. That's a chapter we'll return to again in the future. In fact, we're going to lean heavily on the book of 1 Peter and 2 Peter as we get into the second half of the book of Revelation, especially when we get to chapters 20 through 22. So just hold on to that for a bit. Okay, let me recap real quick. This beast, mouth of a lion, he was dead as if he had been slain, but he came to life again. They're worshiping the beast, and they're saying, who is like this beast? Who could wage war like him? He hates God, and he hates those who dwell in the tabernacle in heaven. He's given authority over every tribe and every tongue and every nation. You might think about Jesus in Matthew 28, all authority is given unto me in heaven and in earth. But his issue is he's totally wrong. He's totally off. He's acting like the Lamb, but he's actually not. He's acting like the servant of God, but he's actually not. He's a servant of Satan. And when we get into the second beast, the beast from the earth, we're going to see the same thing. In verse 11, he looks like a lamb. In verse 13, he performs great signs. He even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth. Make a note for myself there. There we go. They have him. He's going to make an image to the beast to try to, worship the other beasts, and this is not going to be good. It was given to him to give breath to the image, so he's able to give the breath of life, make this image come alive and speak. That's kind of weird, as we see in verse 15. And he also causes, notice the list here, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free men and the slaves. I mean, come on, is that not, passages like Galatians chapter 3, verse 27, or Philippians chapter 2, where they're everybody in heaven and on earth, et cetera, is confessing Jesus' name. It's very interesting how universal this language seems in Revelation chapter 13. And then in verse 17, no one can buy or to sell except the one who goes through him, basically. And so we're going to get into all that in the next chapter, or in the next video. But hopefully you see the image here in chapter 13 is, here's some powers that sure claim to be agents of God, but really they're agents of Satan. And the reason, because they derive their authority from him. And the more they try to convince you that they're from God, the more they prove themselves to be agents of the adversary. And we'll get into that, my friends, in the next video, in chapter 13, verses 11 through 18. Okay, God bless.